Chapter 4 marks one of the most deceptively successful phases for the Van der Linde gang, a point where things appear to be improving on the surface, but are actually spiraling into a slow and inevitable collapse. When the gang arrives in Saint Denis after escaping from Rhodes and the Greys' Braithwaite bloodshed, there's a strange mix of optimism and exhaustion. Everyone is bruised, traumatized, and short on trust, yet Dutch insists they're entering a new beginning. And in a way, they are. They suddenly find themselves in the biggest city they've ever stayed in, surrounded by opportunity. For the first time in the story, the gang isn't hiding in the woods or scraping for food. They're living in an urban center where money seems endless and danger feels less constant. This new environment gives Dutch a burst of confidence. He believes they can finally pull off the job that will secure their freedom. But this shift also begins exposing the gang to forces far larger and more organized than any small-town sheriff or family feud. One of the few things that truly went right early in this chapter was how quickly the gang settled into Saint Denis and built connections. Dutch's relationship with Angelo Bronte becomes the centerpiece of his plans. Bronte offers leads, resources, and a sense of legitimacy that Dutch desperately craves. From Dutch's point of view, if he can impress and work with a powerful man in a modern city, he proves he can adapt to the new world and still thrive. For a while it works. Bronte gives them access to high-value robberies, insider information, and the kind of criminal network Dutch has never had before. Even Arthur initially believes that Bronte might serve as a genuine ally, or at least a decent stepping stone toward a massive payout. Another thing that goes right is the gang's ability to earn substantial money very quickly. The trolley station robbery, the bank job planning, and even the smaller tasks Dutch assigns all generate funds that the gang desperately needs. For a brief moment, morale rises. People eat better, spirits are higher, and Arthur even describes a surreal sense of comfort in Saint Denis, despite the chaos around them. But the biggest problem is that everything positive happening in Chapter 4 is built on a rotten foundation. Dutch's confidence is quickly turning into obsession. Bronte's involvement isn't a partnership, it's exploitation. Bronte uses Dutch and the gang to deal with problems he'd rather not handle himself, like the grave robbery situation and the kidnapping of Jack. Each job pulls the gang deeper into the city's criminal underworld, and Dutch is too focused on appearances and ego to see it. What goes wrong is that Dutch mistakes manipulation for respect. He starts believing that if a man like Bronte sees value in him, it means he's still in control. But Bronte is a master manipulator, and every encounter is a reminder that Dutch is out of his depth in this new world of organized crime, politics, and modern law enforcement. Another major issue is that Saint Denis introduces the gang to new levels of law enforcement they've never faced before. The Pinkertons are no longer on the edges of the story. They're closing in fast. Milton and his men operate legally and strategically within the city, gathering intelligence, tracking movements, and waiting for the gang to make a mistake. The moment Dutch orders the trolley robbery, everything shifts. That job goes disastrously wrong, and it's the first undeniable proof that Dutch's instincts are slipping. The gunfight through the city is chaotic, unplanned, and completely out of proportion to the reward. Arthur realizes it. Hosea realizes it. Even John starts questioning Dutch more openly. The gang escapes, but the cost is enormous. They've lost anonymity, drawn attention to themselves, and confirmed to the Pinkertons that they're in Saint Denis. Jack's kidnapping and Bronte's smug manipulation further push Dutch over the edge. What went wrong here is not just the kidnapping itself, but the emotional impact it has on Dutch. He sees it as a personal attack, a humiliation, and the final proof that the old outlaw ways no longer command respect. When the gang rescues Jack from Bronte's mansion, that moment should have been a victory, something that brought them together. Instead, Dutch turns it into a statement of brutality. When he kills Bronte by drowning him, it's the first unmistakable sign that Dutch has crossed into darker territory. Even Arthur is disturbed by how unnecessary and cruel the act is. Dutch tries to justify it as sending a message, but the truth is that it was pure rage, pride, and spiraling instability. Every step Dutch takes in Chapter 4 is fueled by contradictions. He keeps talking about freedom, but he's getting more reckless. He promises safety, but his decisions are exposing the gang to bigger dangers. He claims to have a grand plan, but he's improvising more than ever. Hosea sees it early. He warns Dutch repeatedly that Saint Denis is not a place they can win in. But Dutch doesn't listen. He thinks the bank job will fix everything. And that leads to the final and most devastating mistake of the entire chapter: the Saint Denis bank robbery. What goes right is that Dutch actually manages to assemble a solid plan. Hosea and Abigail prepare diversions, Arthur and John handle the groundwork, and the gang goes in fully armed and organized. It's the most carefully planned heist they attempt in the entire game. But what goes wrong overshadows everything. They underestimated the Pinkertons. Milton knew the plan from the start, likely because he interrogated and threatened the captured Abigail and had been tracking Hosea. When the Pinkertons storm the bank and kill Hosea, it shatters Dutch's psyche. His last moral anchor is gone, and the gang's best strategist is removed from the board. From that moment, Dutch loses all direction, all rationality, and all trust in anyone who questions him. The rest of Chapter 4 spirals into desperation. The gang flees through the city, shoots their way to the docks, and in one of their worst strategic decisions ever, boards a ship heading to Guarma. That escape wasn't a plan. It was a panic move, something Dutch never would have done before. Everything that went wrong in Chapter 4 can be summed up in one idea. Dutch lost control. Control of his gang, control of his emotions, control of his plans, and control of his identity. The arrival in Saint Denis gave him a chance to rise to the level of the modern world, to adapt and survive in an era that was pushing out men like him. Instead, it exposed his limits, amplified his flaws, and brought the gang into the crosshairs of forces they could never hope to defeat. Chapter 4 is the breaking point disguised as a fresh start. It's the moment when the gang still believes they can escape, but the truth is already written. Dutch is slipping, the gang is losing faith. The Pinkertons are tightening their grip, and the world around them has moved on. What makes this chapter so powerful is that the fall doesn't happen with one big mistake. It happens through a chain of small, seemingly logical decisions that slowly erode everything the gang once stood for. It's the beginning of the end, and the characters don't even realize it until it's far too late. And what makes the final stretch of Chapter 4 even more tragic is how unaware most of the gang members are about just how deep the danger has become. While Dutch slips further into paranoia and pride, the rest of the camp is still trying to believe in the dream he keeps promising. You can hear it in the conversations at Shady Belle. Tilly cautiously hopeful, Uncle trying to stay relaxed, Javier still fiercely loyal, and even Sadie determined to fight for a future. They don't see the full picture the way Arthur and Hosea do. All they know is that they've survived so many disasters already that it feels impossible the next one could be the one that ends it all. But the truth is that Chapter 4 is the moment when survival becomes luck rather than leadership. Arthur especially begins noticing details that Dutch refuses to acknowledge. The city drains him, the people exhaust him, and the corruption he sees everywhere, the police, the industrialists, the politicians, reinforces the idea that Dutch's rebellion is outdated. Arthur still tries to stay loyal, but every failed plan and every reckless order pushes him closer to questioning everything. By the time the gang flees the bank and is scrambling through Saint Denis, Arthur's transformation is already underway. He sees the panic in Dutch's eyes, the collapse of the man he once admired. He sees the fear in John, the confusion in Lenny, the shock on Karen's face as Hosea's death sinks in. And Arthur realizes something that Dutch refuses to. The gang isn't dealing with simple outlaws anymore. They're facing an entire system that has decided to erase them. The emotional weight of these final moments is what makes Chapter 4 unforgettable. It's not just the action, or the twists, or the shocking death.